So my name is Patrick Finnegan. It is December 7, 2022. I am a lawyer at Leach here in Mobile, and I am a member of the Mobile Bar Association since 2003. And I will be interviewing John Leach and talking to him about his life and career. And for those of you who don't know John, he is a very eminent attorney here in Mobile. He's been retired for a while, but just as a flavor of his career, he was a fellow of the American, or is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, which is a very selective lawyer organization. He is a fellow of the Alabama Law Foundation. He was voted one of the top 50 lawyers in Alabama by Alabama Super Lawyers, and he is a past president of the Mobile Bar Association. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But John, before we get started, I have to get your permission with regard to this interview. So I'm going to read this. Do we have your permission for this interview to be recorded and transcribed so that it can be preserved and edited and released in whole or in part by the Mobile Bar Association for viewing by its members and the public?
Yes, you do.
Thank you, John. All right, well, John, I thought we would start, as any good story should, at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, tell us, where and when you were born, and then tell me a little bit about your family and what your memories are, your earliest memories of growing up.
Okay. I grew up in Gadsden, Alabama, which is a town in North Alabama, about 60 miles north of Birmingham. I was born on May 24, 1941, and my father owned a neighborhood grocery store, which had pretty much vanished from the scene now. My mother was a school teacher at the elementary level and also a elementary school principal.
Oh, and you do have an Alabama family connection, John, is that right? Your maternal grandmother?
Oh, Mobile, you mean?
Yes,
Yes, my maternal grandmother was born in Mobile and graduated from Martin Academy. That was the first time I ever heard of Martin Academy.
Yeah, well, it's back and running now,
Oh, yes,
absolutely tremendous. You don't know what year it was that she graduated?
No, I do not.
So tell us about your childhood, your memories of grammar school and kind of what you like to do and kind of how kids of your age kind of amuse themselves in those days in Gadsden.
Well, I went to the public schools, went 6 years to elementary school. I spent the 7th and 8th grade in the junior high, and then 4 years in the high school, and graduated in 1959 from Gadsden High School. Kids in those days spent a lot of time outside.
Yeah.
There were no screens to look at or anything like that. So, the stories you hear of being out from daylight till dusk can be pretty much true. Grew up in the neighborhood where there were several children, friends to play with, and you called home for meals, and that was it. Still is, it may seem, I have memory.
Did you
Making mud pies and catching lightning bolts.
I mean, that's still fun, although it's hard to persuade kids today that it is. So do you recall, did you all get a television at some point?
We did, and the way I remember that, we had it at the time of the inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower's president. I think that may have been around 1952 or something like that. Of course, it was black and white. And that was the impetus for getting it to be able to watch the inauguration.
And were others getting their televisions around that same time? I mean, was that a thing that was going on?
Right, it was beginning to take hold. I had a friend down the street who, his family got theirs before we did. And I can remember walking down there to watch I love Lucy on a regular basis, one of the popular shows at the time.
Sure, still popular in reruns, at least it was when I was watching television with my children some years back. So then tell us about school, John. As far as the academic portion of it, you know, what were your interests? What were the subjects that you particularly enjoyed?
Well, it was a college prep course that I was in with the usual subjects, and I was considered to be a good student, and I frankly enjoyed all of them.
Yeah. How about math? That's usually tough for lawyers.
Well, I never took calculus. I did have to take a math course in college, but I took physics in high school. I never took chemistry. And so I had no desire whatsoever to ever consider medicine.
When you were in high school, did you have a notion of what you wanted to do with, in terms of a career?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. But were you the first generation of your family to go to college?
No, my mother was a college graduate. She graduated from what is now known as the University of Montevallo.
And so what did you know what year she graduated?
I do not.
Okay, and you said she was later a principal, but was her focus education?
Yes.
Okay. And in those days, you know, the options open to women in terms of careers was pretty limited compared to what we have today. Would that be fair?
Absolutely true.
Yeah. So the fact that alone that she went to college probably was not the norm for her generation, your mother's generation. So then, college, when you started thinking about college, what schools were you looking at? Do you recall?
I visited two. One was Vanderbilt University in Nashville. The other was what was known then as Southwestern Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee. Its name was changed later to Rhodes College.
Sure.
And I liked both. I had a friend a year older than I was, who was at each school. And I liked them both, but I chose Vanderbilt. I had a cousin who graduated from Vanderbilt.
Two fine institutions, whose reputations have just continued to grow. So, it must have been unusual, I would imagine, for a kid from the Gadsden High School to end up going to Vanderbilt. Would that be true?
Well, I know when I was a freshman, I know two others, one a sophomore and one a senior from Gadsden, who had attended Gadsden High School, who were there. So I guess there were three of us at one time.
So there was some.
No, I take it back. There was one other person. So there were at least four.
Okay. And what did you expect when you were headed off to college? Well, first of all, it was a great accomplishment to get accepted at a school like that. So that must have been a point of pride for your family to get to.
Well, I don't know what it would be now, but
well,
it was easier back then.
yeah. It's a very highly regarded school today. So, but I mean, going from Gadsden to Nashville, that was a bit of a transition. I know Nashville then wasn't the city that it is now in terms of size, but still, it was an order of magnitude greater than than Gadsden, I would imagine. Is that
well? Sure, but you know, the Vanderbilt campus was pretty much enclosed. I don't mean it was fenced and gated all around, but you pretty much stuck.
self-contained?
Yeah, didn't have a car. If you want to go somewhere, you either had a friend who had a car, and I do not remember whether they let freshmen even had cars or not. But you know, you could ride the bus or something like that.
Did you ever go to the Grand Ole Opry?
I did, in the old Wyman Auditorium.
Wow.
On a Saturday night, and I've always been glad I did that.
You don't recall who's performing that night, do you?
You know, I really don't, but I do remember that Minnie Pearl was one of them. People of a certain age would remember who she was.
Sure. She's legendary.
Mhm.
I mean, she was doing her thing that night.
Yes.
Yeah. So in college, did you start thinking about how you would like to, develop a career and
Well, my
focus on-
career, I majored in political science. And I had some excellent professors and courses that I really enjoyed. And the first summer that I graduated from high school, I worked in Washington, D.C. With the help of a congressman from that area. And it was a job in what they call the folding room of the House of Representatives. What that was a mail room where the congressman sent out baby books or whatever to new parents in their districts, and you were stuck in envelopes and do that sort of thing. But the great part of it was being in Washington, D.C. It's a thing that a lot of young people did, made a lot of friends. And I did that in different places, worked in the congressman's office at least 1 year, and had a grant from Vanderbilt my junior year to do a research project during the summer. And that was done through the congressman's office. So all in all, I think I worked there about 4 different summers. And, you just hone an interest again in politics, and that kind of really been interested in the law.
did you ever think about a career in politics?
No, never.
But you said that experience in Washington kind of opened up the idea of a legal, possibly a legal.
Yes, I think that, two are somewhat aligned.
Sure.
And so,
And so then, what year did you graduate from Vanderbilt?
in 1963.
And you went to law school. Did you go immediately following graduation from Vanderbilt?
Yes, I began, finished Vanderbilt, I guess graduated in June of that summer, and then began at University of Virginia Law School in the September.
So what was the University of Virginia Law School like at that time?
Well, it was much smaller than it is now. It's a different building than it is now. It's grown very much. I don't remember how many people were in the law school class. I know there were 2 women. One was a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. One was an older woman. I don't know her background, but she had a young child. I mean, maybe like 5, 6 years old, school age. And I remember, the child, you see him in the library sometimes with her. There was one Black student in my class, and I think that he was the only Black student at the law school at that time.
And how big was your class?
I don't remember.
Yeah. So how was the experience at the University of Virginia? How were you, as you went along, in the law school, did you feel like I'm on the right track? Did it appeal to you the way that you hoped?
I did. I absolutely loved it. Charlottesville is a beautiful, beautiful city. Smaller town, of course, than it is now. And the University of Virginia is a very historic, beautiful, they don't call it a campus, they call it the grounds.
Exactly.
And it was a wonderful experience.
And did you start to develop an idea of what area of law you might want to focus on during your time in law school?
Not necessarily.
So what was your conception, insofar as you can recall it today, about, what you were going to do when you got out?
Well, this of course was in the, I was single, this was during the time of the Vietnam War. And in the spring before I graduated, I know I'd been called to Richmond for the Army visit. And so I planned on, after I took the bar exam, going into the Army. And then through happenstance, a state court judge from my hometown, Judge Pittman, was named to the federal bench. I did not know Judge Pittman. My parents knew him. I think my mother had taught his son Lee, who's a prominent lawyer in Birmingham. But my congressman that I'd worked for had retired that year. And he was instrumental, along with Senator Sparkman and Senator Hill, and Judge Pittman getting the appointment. And it was an unusual situation. I remember I was in Montgomery taking the bar exam. And I had a call from Congressman Raines, and he said, John, Judge Pittman's been appointed to the federal bench, and he would like me to be his law clerk. And I said, that would be great, but I had this Army obligation. Long story short, I was able to get into an Army reserve unit here, and it was so backed up. It was not until I began clerking for Judge Pittman in August the 1st of 1966. It was not until the following May that I had to go off for basic training. So, and then for the next 6 years, I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, every summer for 2 weeks for the summer training. And then once a month, Saturday and Sunday to Army Reserve drill for 6 years.
What do you remember of your time when you did your basic training?
Well, it was in a garden spot during the summer called Fort Polk, Louisiana.
It's not glamorous.
And it was very hot, but it was interesting. You can imagine, and all of them people. And
did they draw on from? Did they draw on recruits from across the country, or was it just region?
I don't know, it's not good region.
So you ended up with as a law clerk for Judge Pittman. You were his first law clerk,
Yes.
and how long was your term?
Well, he liked to. I was the only law clerk for a year. He liked to have 2 law clerks, but he wanted them one to have been finishing up the 2 years when the other one had finished the first year, so they were staggered and had some experience. So I began in August of 1966. I had to go off in May of 1967 for about 6 months for active duty, basic training. And in the meantime, his new law clerk had come on. So I came back, I believe, in that September and worked to the end of July the following year, 1968. So
give us a little flavor of what it was like working for a federal judge, and in particular Judge Pittman here in those years in Southern Alabama.
Well, it was a fascinating experience because Judge Pittman was appointed as a judge of both the Southern and the Middle districts of Alabama. I don't know whether he was the first one that was appointed to serve 2 districts. But I don't think they've done that much since then. There may have been a few others. But he really had 2 bosses. He had Judge Frank Johnson, well-known judge in Montgomery, and he had Judge Daniel Thomas, a well-known judge in Mobile. But he tried cases in 5 different cities, Mobile, of course, and then Selma, which is the northern division of the Southern District, and then in Montgomery, and then in Dothan, and then in Opelika, which were parts of the Middle District. So it was a fascinating experience because in 5 different cities, saw a lot of different lawyers try cases. We spent very little time in Dothan, not much there, but a lot of time in Opelika, a lot of time in Selma, more time in Mobile, and some time in Montgomery. At that time, when the constitutionality of an Alabama statute was challenged in federal court, the statute required that a 3-judge panel be appointed, and it always consisted of a circuit court judge. Back then, the 5th Circuit was where Alabama was. The 11th Circuit had not been created, and then 2 district court judges. Sometimes the federal circuit court judge was Judge Walter Deering from Greensboro, Alabama. I can remember sometimes it was Judge Richard Reeves from Montgomery, who turned out was Jenny Grenade's grandfather. And then it could be Judge Thomas, it could be Judge Pittman, it could be Judge Johnson. And so those were interesting. There were a good number of those back at that time because of civil rights issues.
And you told me before we sat down here, John, that you recall a case involving an FBI agent in Selma.
Right. One of the cases that was tried before a jury in in Selma, and it was prosecuted by Bobby Jansen, who's the U.S. attorney, involved the Pettus Bridge march in Selma. And the government of the United States was brought charges against someone who I think was arrested in Selma, not sure, for assaulting an FBI agent. So that was probably the last case tried, to my knowledge, involving the Selma march. And I don't remember the details of it, but the person was acquitted. I assume it was probably an all-white male jury. And one thing was interesting, and again, people of a certain age would know who these people were. There was a 3-judge panel in Selma. I remember Judge Walter Ewan was on it, Judge Pittman, and I don't remember who the other district court judge was. But Stokely Carmichael, who was a well-known civil rights activist, came to the courtroom, and he was wearing a Malcolm X t-shirt. Malcolm X, shall we say, did not believe in the nonviolent approach of Dr. Martin Luther King. And Malcolm X was a Muslim. He was later assassinated when he was in his 30s. But he, developed a lot of, shall we say, very vocal organizations and had quite a reputation. And I don't know why they were there or why Stokely Carmichael was there. He was extremely well known as an activist. I think he may have been the one that developed Black Power phrase.
I think that's right.
And he was just there as an observer. There was no drama to it.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it involved some statute that was being challenged that he had been interested in.
Sure. And
So those are interesting.
a little brush with history for a new lawyer, newly minted lawyer.
Yeah.
Stories to tell. So then, John, you finished up with Judge Pittman after 2 years. What was your next step?
I then joined the Mobile law firm that was then known as Inscrudy, Duffy and Prince. And I was with that firm until I went to the Helmsen firm in February of 1983.
Which is now the Helms and Leach firm, where I practice, but we'll get to that. So at Inge Twitty, do you have any particular recollections about your early career and, starting the practice of law?
Well, two things I remember in Mobile County at that time, and I've seen in other counties, there was a court known as the Court of General Sessions. Its jurisdictional limit was $750. I think it was later increased to $1,500. But there were 2 judges there, of course, this bench trial. And one, interestingly, was Judge Paul Bronson, who was blind. And he served on that court for a number of years. And I don't remember which judge it was from, but I remember early in my career at a bench trial in the Court of General Sessions, which was always full of young lawyers being sent down there. And I won the case. I had no recollection what it was, but I remember going into Mr. Tom Twitty, who was the senior partner in a prominent Mobile firm, telling him very proudly that I won my first case. The other thing I remember, my first jury trial.
Well, but let me pause you for a second, John. So the Judge Bronson was blind.
Yes.
How did he deal with that?
Well, you learn to accommodate in your questions. A lot of these are video wrecks, minor video wrecks, and of course there were police reports and then that sort of thing. And my recollection is he had a bailiff that would read to him what the document said and that sort of thing, but he was an amazing person. He lived over here in the Church Street district. He had a seeing eye dog. And my recollection is that he even walked to the courthouse sometimes.
Had he been blind throughout his career?
I do not know the
Yeah.
answer to it.
It's just interesting,
Mhm.
you know, of course, I know there was a blind judge nominated and confirmed federal fund bench up in, I believe, New York, you know, 20 years ago, so. You know, but it's a challenging, I would imagine, issue to kind of, to deal with, as a judge. But you were gonna tell.
Yeah, the first jury trial that I had by myself, one of the senior lawyers in the firm had tried a case in circuit court. And a member of the jury was impressed apparently with his presentation. And so he contacted, Jimmy Duffy contacted Mr. Duffy to represent him in a matter. And his child had been bitten by a dog. And the bite was serious enough that it broke the child's arm. And so Mr. Duffy did not want to particularly fool with the case, so it was passed on to me. And we tried the case, it was a day case, 2 days. And the defense was represented by M.A. Bubba Monfall. Bubba was quite a character in Mobile. He was the leading plaintiff's lawyer in Mobile at that time, and both in criminal cases and in civil cases. And the jury awarded a verdict of $10,000.
Wow.
For the dog bite. Now, this was in it had to have been in probably 69. Well, the Mobile newspapers at that time would publish articles about trials and verdicts and that sort of thing. So there was an article in the Mobile paper, I think it was about 4 or 5 inches long. I kept it under the glass of my desk for years now. I lost it. But it said this case was tried in the Circuit Court of Mobile County. Representing the plaintiff was John and Leach Jr., representing the defendant was M.A. Monfall. Everybody thought that the paper had it wrong, that Bubba must have represented the plaintiff, and I represented the defendant. But I guess that was one of the most fun I'd ever had. I got back to the office and said, "We got a verdict." They said, "Oh, good, how much?" I said, $10,000. They said, $10,000. Well, it was tried before a jury before Judge Bill G. Caffrey, who later became a bankruptcy judge and has been retired and deceased for many years. He cut the verdict down to, I think it was either $2,000 or $3,000, because the owners of the dog, did not have any insurance. I have no idea what they may have paid Bubba. And I honestly don't remember whether we were covered on the verdict or not. It's a shame I don't remember that. But I thought, well, this is great fun, being a police lawyer.
Well, that was a feather in your cap, right?
Well,
Out of the chute to beat up on Bubba Monfall.
I don't know what I beat up on him, but he was surprised to say the least.
Yeah. So then, those are very early on. That was, right out of the clerkship. So then, how long were you at Inch Tweedy?
I was an Inch Tweedy from August the 1st of 1968 until I went to what is now Helms and Leach on February the 1st of 1983.
And tell us a little bit about how your career developed while you were at Inch Tweedy, how you learned the ropes, and what kind of law you practiced.
Well, they did a number of types of things, corporate things, business law too, but they had a significant insurance defense practice. And Jimmy Duffy was very active in that. He was a very good lawyer. And I had the opportunity to sit in a second chair in many cases that he had. He tried some of as defendant, some of the early malpractice cases in Mobile, tried some cases for the Mobile Infirmary. And it was a wonderful learning experience just because of the tips you would pick up. But the wonderful thing about being a clerkship, going back a little bit, for a district court judge who tried cases, in particular when he served 2 districts in Alabama, there were 5 different cities. So I got to see lawyers try cases. And you pick up, well, you know, that may suit my style, that may not. Why did he do that or not do that? That sort of thing. So it was a very good mentoring and learning experience.
Sure, exposure to all kinds of different styles. You ended up, of course, being a litigator, a career litigator. I'm guessing that your experience as a law clerk probably impacted that decision as opposed to going into some other area of law.
Right, you know, I had no, you know, particular interest in corporate law, tax law, that sort of thing. And like I said, just because of the time of the clerkship and the first law firm I was with, I was exposed to the trial work and found enjoyed it.
Can you recall any particular trials from your years with Inge Twitty?
Well, there were a number of trials. There were product liability cases. There were, you know, many trials in the Mobile County Circuit Court. I'm sure there was some in Baldwin County. There were a number in federal court in Mobile. I remember one trial that we had was in settlement, and it was a jury trial. Judge Hand presided over that.
What was federal practice like in those days?
Well, it was much different than it is now. Judge Thomas, you know, who's the senior judge in the Southern District, a wonderful gentleman, a very able judge, highly regarded. He would have a motion docket on Friday afternoon once a month. And that was a regular thing. And then Judge Pittman would also have a motion docket on Friday afternoons once a month, not the same day. But that went by the wayside over the years. I think they only have motions now for special settings, and they don't have the regular motion docket, but that was just part of the routine back then. The criminal cases were mainly in Opelika. I think you may have tried every case of someone who's charged with making untaxed liquor still out of the woods. And that was a very popular criminal thing. And the fun thing about those was the ATF agents would find a still and they would sprinkle a powder on the still. Then they would disappear, hide. And when the operator of the still came along, would get his hands on the still, and the ATF agents would catch him. And the answer was, oh, I was just walking through the woods and came across this still. Well, they would then take him into custody and put a fluorescent light on his hands. And as ATF agents often testified, he lit up like a Christmas tree. And they don't have those anymore. The other popular type of criminal case was interstate transportation of a stolen motor vehicle. Alabama was not a title state. You know, you buy a car now, you have to get a title to it. But Alabama, I could write out hereby sell to Patrick Finnegan my 1960 Ford automobile, and you take it downtown and get the tag and so forth. So it was very easy to steal cars. I had a car when I was working for the federal court from the Mobile airport. And FBI contacted me a few months later after I'd been reimbursed for the insurance company. Said they found it on the used car lot in Biloxi. And the story that went around town was that Judge Thomas would impose the sentence based on the value of the car. Well, that's true or not, I don't know. But it was a Cadillac, got more time than you did for a Chevrolet.
It makes sense. Yeah, that must have been a bummer to arrive back in Mobile and gee, you know, where is my vehicle? And, you know, and there's that like slow dawning of, you know, what had occurred, you know, it's.
You go out and look, I thought parked it here, but you realize it was gone.
So I want to digress a bit here because in and around this time, we're talking about early in your career, you got married.
Yes,
So you married Susan, of course. So Susan was a lawyer herself. Can you tell us, or she went to law school? Can you tell us about how you met, where, and when you met Susan, and then a little bit about Susan, because I know that her mom was a lawyer, and of course, your daughter Martha's a lawyer.
Sure.
So it's 3 generations of female lawyers, which is quite remarkable.
Susan and I met our senior year at Vanderbilt. And then I went on to the University of Virginia Law School. She went to the University of Tennessee Law School. Both of our parents were graduates of the University of Tennessee Law School. And it's very unusual, I don't know what year, in the 1930s, that our parents graduated. And my mother works for the Tennessee Valley Association, not as a lawyer, but probably as a secretary, because they weren't hiring women lawyers. But she got to go to the U.S. Supreme Court to hear the argument in the case of Ashland versus Tennessee Valley Authority. There was some male lawyers in the office. That was the case that determined the validity of the Tennessee Valley Authority. So she never did practice after she got married, but she was, of course, admitted in Tennessee. Susan's father was a lawyer. He was a tax lawyer. He was a graduate of UT Law School also. Susan graduated from the University of Tennessee Law School at the same time that I did from Virginia. And when we married in 1968, she was practicing with the Regional Counsel's Office of the Internal Revenue Service in Jacksonville, Florida. And she tried cases in the United States Tax Court, which were non-jury. And then she did not practice anymore. So she was admitted in Florida, Tennessee, and Alabama. We visited in 3 different jurisdictions. But in 1968, there were not any law firms looking to hire a young, newly married female.
How things have changed.
They really have. At that time, there were 3 female lawyers in Mobile. There's Alice Meadows, who's an older woman who, as I recall, had basically a domestic relations practice. There was an even older lady named Janella Wood, who practiced with a firm then called Hamilton Butler's Prominent Firm. And I don't know whether she was full-time or not. She, I think, handled any cases they had in the bankruptcy court. Back way before my time, one of the first women lawyers in Mobile was a woman named Rosa Gerhardt, who was a court reporter in the federal court. And her picture is on the wall here. She was the first female president of the Mobile Bar Association in 1948.
Wow. And
highly respected. Like I say, she was deceased, I guess, when I came along, but still remembered by the real old timers. Back at that time, she was known as Miss Rose.
That's right.
And so Susan worked as a non-lawyer at the Internal Revenue Service here for about a year. She didn't particularly like that. And then she taught for a year at Julius T. Wright. She had graduated from a girls' prep school in Memphis, and so she really enjoyed that year teaching. And then we had children, and then over the years later, she was an adjunct faculty member at University of South Alabama and at the University of Mobile. From time to time, she taught some law-related courses, not as full-time faculty, but just as an adjunct, and she enjoyed that. And then Dr. Martha graduated from Vanderbilt, and then she took a year off and then went to Alabama Law School, and she married in the summer before her senior year, married somebody from Birmingham that she had married at a wedding reception. And so her last year, 3rd year in law school, she moved from Birmingham to Tuscaloosa. And then she joined a law firm that did litigation called Erie, Furniture, and Stewart. And then she later became a partner in the Boston Bingham Law Firm.
In Birmingham.
And she can learn, and she practices litigation there. So it's unusual. She is a third generation female lawyer.
Yeah, and she's like her dad, she's a trial lawyer. I mean, that's her area of practice.
I'll tell you a funny story, Patrick. Growing up, she was like, "Dad, you just don't plan your schedule right. We'd have a vacation planned or something like that. You know, Mark, we can't go after the judges said it here. You just don't plan right." Well, as you can imagine, the tables have turned on that. And she says, "Dad, I'm sorry, I understand."
That's too funny. That's too funny. Well, Martha sounds like somebody who's, who stands up for herself and kind of protests when things aren't going her way, at least as a young girl. Did you all, know that Martha was headed that way when she was, say, in high school?
No,
Yeah,
I really don't remember, but I think it pretty much came as a complete surprise to us. I don't think we ever suggested it to her or anything, and how she developed it, I'm really not sure. And then we have a younger daughter, Alice, who is in residential real estate. She now lives, she and her family live in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
very nice. So,
She had no interest in the law.
but it's nice to have your two daughters so close by now.
It is.
Within driving distance. And you have grandchildren.
Yes, we have a junior at the University of Alabama, a sophomore at Ole Miss, and a junior in high school.
And are any of those headed towards the legal profession?
Well, the one at Ole Miss might be. I don't know. She's very much interested in politics and international things. She studied in Geneva, Switzerland, and Vienna, Austria.
Oh, wow.
For time this summer.
Oh, wow. How was that experience for her?
She loved it.
Yeah. This is Alice's daughter?
Yes, Alice's oldest daughter.
Okay. Yeah, what a great experience. Well, we can live in hope, John, go for a fourth generation. Although on a different line.
Yeah.
So how did you, a lot of talk, there's a lot of discussion in the legal profession these days about work-life balance. I'm sure that wasn't a term that was used back in the 70s, and maybe I'm wrong, but the reality was the same in terms of, the law is it's a demanding profession. And of course, raising young kids is a demanding task. And how did you find it in those years? I mean, how did you kind of work that so that you weren't in the office all the time?
In the early days, young lawyers were expected to come to the office on Saturday, not to spend the full day, because it was permanent. And when I was Judge Pittman's law clerk, Camp Lyons, who later became a law partner, was Judge Thomas's law clerk. And both Judge Thomas and Judge Pittman expected us to come down to the office on Saturday. They were not there. But Judge Thomas had a practice that he would call a champ every Saturday and ask what was in the mail. And I don't particularly remember Judge Pittman ever contacted me, but that was just kind of expected. And in the early days, against Twitty, a lot of young lawyers were expected to come down to the office on Saturdays. Not any rigid schedule or anything like that.
Did you have to wear a coat and tie?
Oh, and sometimes the senior partner would drop by. It'd always be good if you were there. But I remember my children, when they were young, would like to go down to the office. And their favorite thing was putting their hand on the copy machine and making a copy of their. So I can't say there was a lot of work done then, but that was just the way it was back then. And then, things changed so much. When I started practicing, you got the mail in the morning, and that was it. And then there really weren't hand deliveries. but then I guess it could, and then fax machines came along. And then, Federal Express came along, overnight delivery and that sort of thing. And then voicemail came along. Early on, all your messages were taken by your receptionist or secretary on the pink call slips. And you'd be out of office, you'd come back, that hands you a pile of those, and you'd start trying to return your calls. But then voicemail came along. And then the worst development of all was email. Because that just turned your world upside down. How many weekends were ruined because something was filed at 11:45 on Friday night, and you made the mistake of checking your email. And then depending on what it was, you were all weekend.
Sure.
And the other thing about email, again, practice of law has changed. So clients expect a very, very prompt response. And there's a lot lost in that. I can't think of how many problems I thought I'd solved overnight when I woke up the next morning and get out of the shower. And I read there was some scientific study that said the water running on your head did stimulate your brain cells. But are you able to give it some careful reasoned thought? And the electronic filing, of course, was so different. That's the same thing. Somebody filed a pleading at the end of the day electronically, and you had to sue over that. Also, an interesting thing I remember was when you had a brief, this is in the early days in Alabama Supreme Court, I think you had to file 7 copies, and they were all carbon copies. And your secretary would be driven crazy. You found a mistake, then it had to be erased on all the different carbon copies. There were just all sorts of strange rules about how the record was transmitted to the Alabama Supreme Court, prepared by the clerk's office on sheets of paper about like that, tied with a red ribbon a certain way. And oftentimes lawyers would send their brief up to the Alabama Supreme Court on the Greyhound bus, take it down to the bus station and arrange for somebody in a law firm up there to meet the bus and take it over to the court. They had a night person there that could accept it for filing. So, in some ways it's a lot simpler, some ways it's not, but those are just different.
It's a mixed blessing, but it's certainly, I graduated law school in '95, and I kind of caught a bit of that old world and a lot of the new in the legal profession. And even in my time, John, things have speeded up enormously in terms of having to turn stuff around.
And travel, of course, to travel somewhere for a deposition on an airplane back in the 1960s was very unusual. The stories, people take the train to Montgomery, take the train to Atlanta, where it's already before the Court of Appeals. And, sound like an old fogey, but they've just been in those 50 some odd years, enormous development in communication, travel.
Traveling by plane, it's routine today. You go to
no video depositions, much less Zoom depositions.
Well, Zoom, of course, we really came on during the COVID pandemic, the worst of it, and so that was yet another, and Zoom court session, court hearings, and so I've experienced, just in hearing you talk. Some of that stuff, I recall where you could could go on vacation for a week and, basically be gone for a week.
Yeah.
And that is no longer the case, sadly. So John, then after, more than a decade of English treaty, you came over to what is now the Helmsing Leach firm. What was it called back then?
It was called Cole, Helmsing, Lyons, and Simmons.
And 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 Lyons was Champ Lyons, who you had gotten to know as a law clerk, and Champ went on to be an Alabama Supreme Court justice.
Correct.
And how did your practice change, or if it did, as you transitioned over to the new firm?
Well, when I came to Joe Helms and I said, look, I don't know whether I'll bring me clients or not. And they said, well, that's okay, that's not a prerequisite. Well, fortunately, it happened that, a number of clients did follow me over there. And, over the years developed, new clients. And so almost everything I did was, related to litigation in one way or the other. Some, defendants and hospitals, physicians, that sort of thing, a lot of medical malpractice work. Did some plaintiff's work in corporate cases, mainly representing some plaintiffs in federal court and business matters, and did a lot of work for the Alabama Power Company. There were a number of years I did all the condemnation work. We were building new lines in Mobile County and some other civil cases for them. There were a number of years when I did work for the International Paper Company. Some years when I represented the Mobile Infirmary, and other random clients on a one-shot basis.
Sure. So a varied selection of cases that you dealt with over those
Yeah,
years.
it was varied. You never knew I was involved in a machine one time, and
One of the things that's very much part of a litigator's life, John, particularly in a firm of particular size, perhaps not the larger firms where you can really specialize, but for the types of firms, where you spent your career, certainly at Helms and Leach, you get a new case and it involves an area of, let's say, industry that you don't know anything about, and you have to get up to speed on it. It's like a whole new, like a paper mill case.
Yeah.
You could walk in, I don't know anything about a paper mill, but a year later, you can give a seminar, on paper mills.
well, I don't know about a seminar, but you have to crawl into some hot, dirty places. And
Well, let me ask you this question, since you're bringing it up. This is it may seem like a random question, but it's from a conversation we had long ago. Where is the oddest place you ever took a deposition?
and let's see, the oddest place. Well, two places. One was in Montreal, Canada. It was an admiralty case. I did some Longshore and Harbor Workers Act and Jones Act cases, and some other admiralty cases for a period of time. And so we were in Montreal, and it was Mike Allen, who's an admiralty lawyer, excuse me, Elliot Langford, who's a prominent admiralty lawyer, and a lawyer from Birmingham, can't remember his name now, but anyway, it involved a collision, as I recall, on a fire in the St. Lawrence River. And so we were going to depose a longshoreman, and we had an interpreter, the longshoreman wanted to give his deposition in French. And so he came by the office where we were taking it that morning, and it wasn't the time for him, and we said, come back after lunch. So we were sitting back for lunch, and he came back, and I forgot if it was Elliot or Mike, somebody started asking questions. And the translator was translating the questions, and she started looking funny. The court reporter was bilingual, and she started looking funny. Turned out it was his day off or payday at the docks or something, and he'd gotten drunk during the time from that morning to the time we get into deposition. And he'd been drinking cognac. He said, he kept saying, cognac, cognac. So that was the case of the drunk witness, excuse me. So we had to adjourn that and then never, resume that witness. Another time, Ham Fussell and I went to, an island in, Barbados, to an island in the Caribbean. And it again was an admiralty related case. I think it involved engine failure or something. And it was in an area off of Barbados. And so we went down there and took, depositions. And so those were two
Unusual.
unusual.
Yeah. Here, and then that's very interesting, and we could talk about those two. I'm sure those were, traveling outside the states, the positions thing into itself. And it probably wasn't you, John, but I had a recollection and I thought it was you for a moment, of taking a deposition, and it was outside, and it might have been, can't remember if it was by a railroad intersection or something like that.
I don't recall
Okay.
that. I know right before I retired, we had a case that depositions were noticed in India, in Mumbai, India, and so forth. And I asked Russell Buckman, was working on the case. I said, Russell, would you like to go to India and stuff? At that stage in life, I did not need to travel to India. He went with others. Mobile they had quite an experience.
Yeah, he has a carved elephant on his desk.
I didn't know that.
With memento. And so, John, I joined Helms and Leach in 2003, and you and the late great Fred Helmsing were the senior partners at the firm at that time. And you, and then you were at Helms and Leach until you retired. What year did you retire?
I think it was 8 or 9 years ago.
Okay, and I'd like to just briefly touch on a couple of cases that the experiences you had that I recall that were in and around when I joined the firm. One of them related to September 11, 9/11. Tell us what you were doing on 9/11.
Well, I was in New York City, had flown up there on the 10th of September. There were storms all along the coast, and I remember sitting in the Atlanta airport watching the radar storms along the East Coast, and it cleared out. And so that night, planes were flying in New York City. The storms had cleared, and I was on the left-hand side of the plane. It was just a magnificent view of the Statue of Liberty that I remember. Greg Breedlove was there. He had taken his wife. And I was there as a lawyer from Atlanta and Dana Frazier. And so we were taking the deposition of my client, who was a physician. And the deposition was being taken in Midtown Manhattan. We were in a conference room, and right outside the door was the Empire. Outside the window was the Empire State.
You could see it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And
How high up were you in your building? I mean, was it up? I mean,
Oh, yeah, it could have been 20-something.
Okay, so so you're high, yeah.
And we were getting ready to begin the deposition, and interestingly, Greg had set up the place to take it, and it was the office of a group of people that specialized in plaintiff's work in airplane crashes. And so we were getting ready to start, and somebody came in the room and said, "Oh, plane just hit the World Trade Center." And so they had the TV on. We went out and looked, and well, Then we started the deposition. Then they came in later and said, "Another plane hit the World Trade Center." And well, we went ahead, with the deposition. We were all from out of town, and I thought, if there's going to be a third attack, we may have a bird's eye view right outside this window.
I mean, that was a fair assumption, right? I mean, in terms of.
It could have been. It was the next tallest building.
Right.
And,
Huh? I mean,
not really,
Yeah.
because we didn't know what the deal was. We didn't know it was a terrorist.
Right.
But then, I can remember we took a break for the deposition, and the husband of an employee at the firm walked into the office. He had worked in Lower Manhattan. And he came in just covered in white, just covered in white powder. And we could look out the window. I guess we were looking out on, let's see, Empire State's, what, about 34?
34.
Yeah. And there was just a stream of people, all covered in white, walking up from downtown and past Midtown. And so it was, long story short, it was, I think that was a Tuesday. And it was that following Thursday before some of the people from Mobile that live on other business were able to, rent a car. And we left around noon that day and drove till late at night, stopped in Bristol, Virginia / Tennessee.
Yeah,
Got up
on
early,
81.
yeah, got up early the next morning and turned the car into Mobile Airport. And we asked the car attendant, this car came from New York City. You had one in the road, and she said, yes, somebody turned in one that day that had driven from New Mexico. And so that was, just a very interesting and sobering type of experience. I remember.
When did you first talk to Susan? After you kind of.
It was a long time because my phone died and didn't have any way to charge it. I'd spent the night before there. I was expecting to fly out that afternoon. And I was unable to reach her, but I think I reached somebody at the office. And I think she contacted somebody.
I mean, if I recall, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of phone services just gone.
Yeah. Well, the next night, Dana and I took one of Ed Sledge's sons to supper that night. He worked in the Twin Towers. And it was Ed and Nancy were absolutely frantic before they could get in touch with him. But he told us the story of, I don't remember which building he was in, but as he was coming down the steps to get out, there were firemen rushing up, passing him to go and save people.
Yeah.
And right after that, I had a new case. I had to travel to Dallas quite a bit. And I remember the first trip, everybody on the plane, kind of looked at each other,
Checking them out.
And the Dallas airport, most of the concessions, were closed. And so, just a strange time.
Yeah, I mean, it was just remarkable coincidence that you happened to be there on that day. And to have gone through that, and thank God you got back safe. Is it Dallas case? Is that the Hunt case?
It is.
All right, so that's a nice segue, and this will be the last anecdote I'll ask you, because we're getting close to our time here. But so is that the case where you had Dr. Phil as a trial consultant?
That's correct. We represented Hunt Petroleum Company, headquartered in Dallas, in a case brought by the state of Alabama. It involved a calculation of royalties owed the state from oil and gas production. And they had sued a number of companies. They'd sued Exxon, I can't remember who all they sued. They got just an absolutely huge verdict against Exxon, and then it was reversed. And I think it was tried again in Montgomery, and that was where Cunningham Brown represented the state of Alabama in those cases. And so it was a bet the company case for the Hunt Petroleum Company, privately owned by the Hunt family. And so they retained the company, and I can't remember the name of it. Dr. Phil McGraw was the head of it. They were trial consultants. And Dr. Phil had come to prominence because Oprah Winfrey, as I recall, was sued for, I think it's libel and slander, for defamation, somewhere in Texas, because of some comment she made about some industry. And Dr. Phil was a trial consultant, and she won the case before a jury. And she was enamored of him, and so she had him as a regular guest on her show for several years. And, that was how he became prominent. The rest is history, you know.
Well, he was-
wrote books and all that.
I mean, so at the time you all, hired him, he had some level of fame, but he hit the stratosphere after that.
No, I did not know who Dr. Phil was.
Yeah.
And, so we had a meeting at the office of his consulting firm in Dallas. And, we met with him in the conference room and several hundred executives and one of their house lawyers and so forth. So I innocently asked, Dr. Phil, will the jurors know who you are? And he said, oh, yes, they'll know who I am. Came home and said, my wife, you know, Dr. Phil. Oh, yeah, I know Dr. Phil. Everybody knew Dr. Phil, but me, you know, but I didn't get to watch daytime television. And so one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And he had a top-notch group. He came for he would give advice pre-trial, and then he came for the jury selection.
Mhm.
And word got around the courthouse, Dr. Phil was there. And so as I recall, there was kind of a group of hangers on that hung out in the hall to say hello to Dr. Phil. And he was introduced during the jury selection. And I remember there was one older gentleman that's obviously retired, maybe he watched daytime television, and, you know, coming in, ask, anybody know Dr. Phil? I recognize Dr. Phil. This older man stood up and said, I know him. He said, he's good. And I guess there was some other smattering, you know, that knew him. And then he came back for the closing arguments.
Mhm.
And that was just working with his team. You know, the courtroom was filled. Cunningham Bounds, the state had consultants and all of that. The courtroom was just filled with all kinds of electronic equipment, fancy screens and all of that sort of thing. So you know, there were moot trials that were tried and all sorts of things. I've done moot trials before in focus groups, everything, but nothing like this. It was
Mhm.
pretty elaborate.
Mhm.
And then I think the verdict was $25 million, which was de minimis compared to some of the other verdicts. And we appealed it to the Alabama Supreme Court. And Chris King, a lawyer, like for Franklin Birmingham, and I argued the case for the Alabama Supreme Court. And I know Dave Burgess and another lawyer from Cunningham argued in the court. I can't remember who it was. The trial team was Bob and John Crowley during the trial. And one of the judges on the court, I can't remember which one it was, his wife taught at Jones Law School in Montgomery. So they had all of her class and all of these students from Jones Law School in the audience to hear the arguments. And Champ Lyons was on the court. He recused himself because that firm was involved, you know. And anyway, long story short, the court reversed and remanded the case and said the plaintiff could not prevail. So that was a very interesting experience all the way through. I take no credit for writing the brief. Judge Sam Horner, who's a distinguished judge, federal judge in the Northern District of Alabama, had retired, and he was a lawyer like Franklin and a brilliant scholar. And he wrote the brief. And I was privileged to be a part of the argument for that. But I guess that was the most elaborate percolation I ever had.
Yeah, that, it was an amazing case. That was right after I got to Helmling, and it's remarkable how well it all ended up, you know, for organization. So I just want to finish up, John, by asking you some kind of just general questions about the legal profession and your observations on it at a kind of a high level. And then maybe ask you also, if you could talk to your younger self, you know, coming out of the University of Virginia Law School, what advice might you have for that young man today?
And women.
And women, of course.
I think the University of Virginia law class has 50-50, probably,
Sure.
at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, women certainly in all areas are just, you know, really, I mean, they're thriving, I think the numbers are exceeding men in many fields.
Well, of course, and this is pretty much standard advice, but it's very true. You know, the main thing a lawyer has is his or her reputation, for good or for bad. And the most important way you can be successful in the practice of law is to maintain a good reputation. Let the judges know, and they will learn that if you say something, they can count on it. If you're devious in some way, citing some case or whatever, or misrepresenting facts, well then, you may not be believed in the future and that sort of thing. So your reputation among the judges is of paramount importance, but equally important is your reputation for truth and honesty among fellow lawyers. You know, back in the day, I know any number of lawyers, maybe on the opposite side, but if they said something, took it to the bank. There wasn't any letter writing to confirm this conversation or that sort of thing. Then unfortunately, that was not true of everybody, but you learned who those people were. And now there's so many lawyers that you would not know. I mean, you know, the bar is just expanded. And so, I'm sure if I started out practicing now, I wouldn't know lawyers. But I would advise young lawyers to get to know as many lawyers as they can. You know, be active in the Young Lawyers Association. If you're female, be active in the Mobile Bar Association. Be active in the Women Lawyers Association. You know, go to bar meetings, meet people, sit, not with your firm, but sit with somebody you don't know and meet them. And, you know, if you're having a dispute with somebody that you know, that you had a meal with or whatever, it's a lot easier to resolve that on a person-to-person basis than dealing with somebody you've never met. They don't know you, you don't know them, you think they're being a jerk, they think likewise, that sort of thing. And with a big bar, it's not always easy to know them, but develop that trust, because that just pays off huge dividends. But be active in the bar association. That's the way not only you get to know people, but you learn so much more about, you get advice all the time, see how other lawyers do things for good or bad. And so be active in that. And, you know, you've heard the old joke, if the facts are against you, pound the table, you know, but be prepared. Because judges know if you're prepared or not prepared. Juries sense that and everything. And unfortunately, one reason I'm guessing I'm retired now, number one, I'm not schooled in all the electronic discovery. You know, back in the day, you had to shepherd the case, you pulled out the red brown book, looked at it, and you know, all this technology keeps
I'm not sorry to see the bag of shepherds.
keeps evolving, but you know, I think there's a lot more distrust of lawyers now among each other from what I hear. And you know, there's a much smaller group. I think in a few years, I virtually knew every member of the Mobile Bar. You know, may not have ever had a case with them, but I could probably pick them up out of a lineup. You would see them on the street going back and forth to the courthouse. Who's that? That's
Sure, you go to lunch, you know, one guy at a table. Yeah.
So it was a whole different thing, but you can establish a reputation, no matter what you do. by being prepared in what you do, being honest in what you do, maintaining your integrity. I think that's the most important thing. That's just standard good advice.
Well, that is great advice, John, and I think we couldn't end this on any better note than that. So it's been a pleasure talking with you, as it always is, and look forward to many other conversations.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Brought back a lot of memories.